Our next speaker is Duncan Logan, the founder and CEO of RocketSpace, an open innovation campus in the heart of San Francisco. Duncan's passion for helping technology startups has fueled the success of more than 200 companies, including Uber, Leap Motion, and Podio. At 24, he started his first company, CityPro, which he built to $8 million in revenue over a 3-year period before its sale in 2000. In 2002, Duncan joined Message Labs, an early SaaS security company, which he helped to build until it was sold to Symantec in 2008 for $700 million. He made the move to San Francisco in 2008. I guess the real estate just became really affordable about that time. Please welcome Duncan Logan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great. So this is great because this is like a favorite topic of mine, and I've been given pretty much carte blanche to talk about anything I want, but I have been told I'm not allowed to take, just get a clock going here, I'm not allowed to take too long. First of all, quick hands up, who here works for a startup? A couple of people, okay, so who here works for a corporate? That's good. So there are some unemployed in the audience, but welcome to you guys anyway. So I'm definitely from the startup side of things. I love the job that I have now because it's really from the startup side, but I work a lot with corporates. And fortunately, I've been given a couple of headings that they want me to talk to, and the first one's actually a subject of my favorite topic, talking about my own company. So RocketSpace, we started in, actually, hands up who's heard of RocketSpace before today. Okay, a couple of you. Great. They're videoing this. About 10,000. Okay, that's fine. Okay, half the audience. For those of you who don't know, we're a technology campus based in San Francisco. We've got about 170 companies on campus at the moment, about 700 people in total. And our thesis, and this is a good thing about entrepreneurs, they always talk about their thesis for starting the company, but the truth is they always write the thesis after they've started the company. And so you kind of work it out. It makes you sound smarter if you kind of do it in reverse. So our thesis at the time was software's eating the world. That great comment by Mark Andreessen. And what was sort of interesting about that was we were noticing there was this enormous expansion of technology. Okay, enormous expansion of technology around the world, but the technology was clustering in certain cities. And my first job out of university was actually a derivative trader, and I kind of saw RocketSpace as the stock exchange of tech. That was my sort of mindset of what we could do with RocketSpace. We were going to see these technology clusters form in places like Tel Aviv and London and San Francisco and New York. As tech expanded, it wasn't just going to be based here in the Valley. And you know, eventually I thought cities would be talking about, you know, at the moment there's our downtown financial center. In years to come, they're going to say that's our downtown tech district. And I thought, here's a great opportunity. We'll become the stock exchange of tech. And so that really was our starting point. And what we've kind of noticed since then is technology is a very educated person's business. Okay, it's highly educated people that work in technology. And what we know about highly educated people is they are the most mobile people of any workforce. And originally, when we were starting RocketSpace, people were saying, oh, you're going to base yourself next to all the universities. And the truth is, educated people are very mobile, and very mobile people are wanting to work and live in these cool cities. There's this whole urbanization going on, and people, dare I say it, speaking down here, people want to work and live in places like San Francisco and Tel Aviv and London and New York. So we've seen these clusters form, and all we're doing is trying to be at the heart of those clusters. Now, we describe RocketSpace on its platform basis is Office as a Service. Okay, we think the commercial real estate market's a $1 trillion market. I actually think 5 to 10% of that market will move to an office as a service model. It just makes a lot more sense, especially at the moment where if you're in San Francisco trying to take an office down at the moment, you'll be asked for at least 1 year's rent as deposit. So this office as a service model, that's the platform that we provide. So we provide everything, furniture, connectivity, all the rest of it up to the desktop. On top of that, we then focus on sort of 4 core areas. The first one is access to capital. Now, actually, RocketSpace, to get into RocketSpace, you have to be a technology company. And secondly, you have to have raised 1 round of funding. Okay, so there is a sort of quality bar. Every company in RocketSpace is funded. But there's constantly more funding going on. About 1 company a week is closing a round of funding. And actually, in our first 3 years, the collective amount of funding crossed $3 billion. $3 billion over just over 500 startups within 3 years. So access to capital is really important to us. The second thing is access to talent. There's an enormous talent shortage, so we started a business called RocketU. It's an education business, and it just runs boot camps. At the moment, they're doing Python and Django and these sort of things, producing talent to then work in the startups that are at RocketSpace. The third part was something we didn't expect, and that was the corporates. And within a few weeks of opening RocketSpace and getting the first companies in there, we started getting approached by corporates who were talking about this thing called innovation and how can they harness the power and the innovation that startups were putting together. And that's something we're obviously going to talk a lot more about. So the final part, the fourth one, is the events. So we're running about 3 or 4 events every week to help these startups be successful. And the thing that's been, I take great pride in, but really we played no part in, is the companies have raised over $3 billion. We have had 5 companies reach $1 billion valuation. 1 or 2, like Uber, have done a lot better than that. Uber, when they came in, were 6 or 7 people, Travis and Ryan. They're now bigger than RocketSpace in its totality. They've got more space than we do. But other companies such as Spotify, Hootsuite, Kabam, Mog, Supercell are in there at the moment, Podio. And what we found is that quality attracts quality. So as soon as we started getting some of these quality companies, all the other quality companies started coming in. And we get about between 25 and 30 applications a week. And all we're doing now is just cherry picking the best companies because we fundamentally believe that young companies are like young people. You are a product of your environment. The people you hang out with, the people you work alongside, the coffee, water fountain conversations really affect the outcome of your company. So that is RocketSpace in a nutshell. And what I want to go on to now is start talking about how we see innovation from the bottom up. And it really is, this isn't a kind of McKinsey report of innovation from the top down. Everything we do at RocketSpace is from the bottom up. And when we're working with corporates, we really focus around 2 core things. One is what we call retained discovery. We have a team of analysts. There's about 6 analysts who are constantly analyzing startups all around the world, about 35,000 startups, and providing that sort of sonar system back to corporates on who's doing what in specific market areas. And I'll talk about some of that. The second thing is campus engagement. That's where corporates are actually putting innovative teams of their innovation in RocketSpace to sit and work around other startups. So those are the 2 things. And obviously, we're greatly appreciative to Fujitsu, who have a team with us as well. So I have this theory about entrepreneurship. And it really starts with recognition platforms. I don't think soccer or sport would be nearly as attractive if it wasn't for the media that promotes sport. We'd all just be playing local sport with each other. And the same goes for music. You know, sure, you could be playing music in a bar, but I think the fact that we have this music platform makes it a lot more attractive and a lot more interesting to work in. And I think that's exactly what's happened with the web and, more importantly, with the mobile web. We now have the largest platform in the world, and it allows and it enables entrepreneurs to come and do significant things and interesting things and be recognized for doing those things on a great platform. From where we sit, entrepreneurship is absolutely on fire. I know that's not the case all around the world, but in the key markets that we're just seeing an enormous attitude and aptitude for people wanting to go and work for startups, to such a point that we now have large corporates coming to us saying, we are really struggling, they don't all have lisps, we are really struggling to hire young talent into our business. We're having to step up to get the best talent who used to come straight out of university and want to come for work and work for our company. They're now wanting to go and work for startups and do totally different things. And I think that is part of the challenge that people have. So the technology entrepreneurship is on fire, and just actually on a, and as I say, it's the mobile internet that I really think has taken this a step forward. And on a side note, this month, the iPhone is 7 years old. This month. Can you believe that? It was announced in January 2007. It launched in June 2007, 7 years ago. That's it. And in that time, it's been pretty disruptive. The Maps business has pretty much been disrupted. BlackBerry, I think, would safely say, is pretty much been disruptive. Cameras, alarm clocks, even the iPod, you know, a sort of self-disruption there. That's come in. I'd actually say conversation's been disrupted. Nobody seems to speak to anyone anymore. But what's really interesting about that is, this is something I looked up last night, the average person checks their phone 110 times per day. That's the average person. In 7 years. Who would have predicted that? He says, looking at his phone, 10 minutes, done. Anyway, okay. So why is disruption or innovation moving at such a pace? And I think one of the first things is nobody starts from zero anymore. You know, if you want to start innovating, if you want to get into anything, you just start reading. And you read out where everyone else has managed to get to. And tomorrow you start your business where they left off last night. You don't have to go back to the start. You just start from where everyone else leaves off. And this is a great thing. But at the same time, everything's sort of half-baked already. You know, if you want to create a website, you go to WordPress. You don't need to go back to the binary code. Everything's, you know, already half-made. If you want to put in a payment process on your website, you can use an API or a shopping cart or you know, analytics or any of that. It's all half-baked. So the whole concept of building something is so fast now. And one of the really interesting things about RocketSpace is there's really no sales teams. Because all these guys, they build their product, they get it up and running, and then they put it on a sales platform, like iTunes or some of the other ones, Amazon. So they can put it out on that platform, and they can be at proof of concept within weeks. You know, once you're on iTunes, you're in front of millions, you know, hundreds of millions of people. And so the whole transition time to getting an idea up and running has massively reduced. You know, it used to take months, if not years, and now it's down to literally a couple of weeks before you can see it getting going. So, and then the lean startup, this idea of, well, you don't even have to build anything before you find out if there's demand for it. And that's actually, it's a kind of little side story, but that's how I started RocketSpace. I actually put up an advert on Craigslist, which was for a company, I made it up, fake company, called 3PM, and it stood for per person per month, PPPM. And I put it up on Craigslist, and in the first day, first 12 hours, I got 8 responses from companies going, this sounds really cool, where is it, and how do I apply, and so forth. And 5 of those companies were technology companies, so I took down the advert, and I waited a couple of days, and I put up the same advert, and this time I put for tech companies only. And I got 15 responses in about 8 hours. And then I thought, geez, right, I better go and find a building and get going. But I hadn't spent any more than just a kind of napkin with that idea before I found out that there was actually demand for what I was potentially going to go and build. And that's a really cool thing that you can do with technology now. Facebook has this incredible, what do you call it? Not mantra. It's this work ethic in Facebook. Does anyone here work at Facebook? Okay, I can talk about Facebook. So at Facebook, I've got a couple of friends who work there, and I always go, you know, it's such a cool company, and why is it so cool? And And they all come back to the same thing. They say, at Facebook, you never go to a meeting and say, I have an idea. They kind of almost get thrown out. You don't go, I've got this idea, maybe we should try, what you do at Facebook is everyone's got access to the data. You go along, you say, I've got this idea. And so you go away and you access the data and you play around with it and you work out that idea. And then when you go to the meeting, you go, a couple of weeks ago, I had this idea. What if we did this, this, and this? And so I went ahead and got John and we did that. We pushed it and here's the results. Boom. And they're amazing. And the cool thing about doing that at Facebook, if you think about it, is all the bad ideas never even get to the meeting. Because you're not going to say, I had this idea, and then we did all this work, and it was totally useless. You're only going to take the really good ideas to the meeting. So they're only working on really good ideas, which is a kind of great thing. But it's this thing, again, you can test stuff before you even have to commit to it. I'd love to work for Facebook, I think. I think they'd be a great, great company. So anyway, what's the innovation process? Well, first of all, there has to be strategic business intent. Okay, there's no point innovating in a totally different direction to the direction of your business. And that is something which isn't always obvious to people. But I think you have to have strategic intent. There's then obviously the idea stage, that minimum viable product, which is becoming increasingly easy to have, product market fit, and then take it to market and scale. And that's where corporates come in. That is the hard part for startups. And I'll come back to why I think there's a big opportunity there for the corporates. But it's wrong to say that corporates are not good at innovation. Corporates are great at innovation. There's lots of great corporate, Apple, Amazon, Procter & Gamble, great examples of where corporates are good at innovation. So I think it's wrong when people say, oh, big companies can't innovate. They can. It's just there's different types of innovation, and I think you need to be enabling all of them at the same time. Okay, so why is innovation important? So I heard this, I'm not going to take any credit for this. I heard this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was absolutely spot on. And I'm going to make you wait just a second before I tell you. So this person stood up and he said, I think of innovation. Innovation is a company's immune system. And I thought, that's actually a really good way of thinking about it. Because without an immune system, you don't die immediately. But the chances are, without an immune system, you will eventually die. Okay? And an innovation is your immune system. And I think it's a really healthy way of thinking why you need innovation in your business. But I'm sure everyone knows these sort of figures. The average lifespan of an S&P 500 company back in 1958 was 61 years. 1980, 25 years. 2012, 18 years. Okay, and it's continuing to shrink. In the past decade, just in the past decade, E-Trade is in, of the S&P 500, Bear Stearns is out. Salesforce is in, PeopleSoft is out. Amazon is in, Radio Shack is out. Netflix is in, Clear Channel's out. I could go on. I won't. But this is just an example of how quickly companies are turning over. And arguably, these are all the companies that are coming out of there are the companies that have struggled to keep up with the innovation. There's a guy, Richard Foster, who writes, corporations need to have a creative destruction. There's three core things for a corporation. One, running operations effectively. You have to be super effective at running your operations to run a corporate. Two, creating new businesses that match customer needs. And three, and I think this is the most important one, getting rid of, divesting from businesses which no longer match your company's growth targets. Okay, and that's important because what we see is most companies don't move forward with innovation because it's cannibalizing an existing revenue stream, which is a business they shouldn't be in anyway. And if you divest that business, there's less friction to bring on new businesses. And I think this is going to be a pattern for successful companies, is they're going to basically ride the adoption curve. And stuff at the back end of the adoption curve, they're going to divest and divest and divest. And stuff at the front end, they're just going to acquire and acquire, and they're going to bring it in, and they're going to use their reach, and they're going to use their operational efficiency to keep themselves relevant as a business. And I think that is going to become more and more apparent as a business model for people in the future. So, innovation in corporates is complicated. There are, in a lot of corporates, in all corporates, there are what we call corporate antibodies. Okay, these are the naysayers that are against all sort of innovation. And what's really sort of interesting is that startups get rid of those people really, really quickly. I always say startups are a cult. Okay, there's a leader, a vision, a mission, and they expect everyone to work for free. And that's basically how they work, and they get going. It's all about the leader and the vision and the mission. They just get on it and get on it and get on it. It's very hard for corporates to get that sort of mentality. But startups are also genetically engineered to either innovate or die. It's a pretty compelling argument for a startup. You either have to innovate or you're dead. So you're pretty motivated to be innovative. And this is the problem for larger corporates, is larger corporates are motivated by very different things, which is shareholder returns and things that make the numbers look good this quarter and next quarter. And it's really hard for them to take those innovative steps, which quite often are going to hurt today's performance, but it's hurting today's performance in order to ensure tomorrow's performance. One of the things that I always find interesting is startup founders are always fascinated by the scale and reach of a corporate. We just can't understand how could a company have such scale. We're always looking at, if only we had their customer base, if only we had their size and their mass. Startup founders are always fascinated by the scale and reach of the corporate. But in turn, the corporate execs are always fascinated by the speed and the passion of the startups. And I think that is where that win-win in a good partnership can work. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the corporates and some of the interesting things they're doing with us at RocketSpace. So one of our corporates is called Pearson. Pearson owns the Financial Times, and they also are big in the education space. And what they did, which I thought was really brave, is they set up a team called the Future Technology Team. And they gave them a budget and set them apart. And they're probably the most hated team within Pearson, because their job is to be the disruption in Pearson. They are given budget to invest in companies which are either already or going to cannibalize Pearson's own existing revenue streams, which is a really, really brave thing for a corporate to do. But their whole thesis was that, and this is absolutely true, disruption and innovation are exactly the same thing. Whether you call it disruption or call it innovation, it's exactly the same thing. You call it disruption when you're not engaged with it. You call it innovation when you are engaged in it. So they call this their innovation team, not their disruption team. And it will mean, I have full confidence, it will mean that the innovation which is changing their industry, they will be a part of. And just by doing that, one team who are given that independence to go ahead and make those investments will keep them relevant. British Airways, another company, have done another unpopular thing. They've created some APIs which allows other companies, so British Airways, most of their sales come in through BA.com. There's a whole team that works around BA.com, their website, and their back-end tech team have now created an API to allow anyone to come in and do bookings and so forth through that. Hugely unpopular with their web product team, but again, really, really powerful for them as a company and for their survival. And creating APIs is often a great starting point, I think, for corporates to get going. We also work with Samsung. Samsung came to us when they were working on their Galaxy Gear watch. They were interested in a piece of technology. They thought they could either go and make it, but they came to us and asked, was there any startup we knew that was making it? And the funny thing about that was we did know of a startup. There was a 3-person team in Italy. We flew them over. We showed them what they were working on. The company's called Atuma, and Atuma is now embedded in every Samsung watch that they produce. AB InBev, another partner. AB InBev obviously sell a lot of beer, spend a huge amount on advertising, especially around sport. And they were asking how could they get better engagement in sport. We introduced them to a second screen gaming company called Quarter. And suddenly, you know, when you're running an advert on TV, it's really hard to know who's really watching it and who's getting it. But when you've got a couple 100,000 people watching the sport on TV, but playing a game on a second screen TV, who log in using Facebook, you suddenly get an enormous amount of data on who's watching your sport and who's seeing your adverts. And that's been an enormously successful partnership for them. And then finally, and possibly my favorite one, is Lego. Lego, who make bricks, little kids' toys, who for all their time have been competing with Mattel and other things. All of a sudden, a game came out of nowhere at Lego from an online gaming company, which suddenly brought out a physical product, online and physical product, called Skylander. Anyone heard of Skylander? So this is like a little action character hero, and you put him in your pocket, and you can fight and little hardware thing. But when you sit him on a little puck, he's got a little chip inside him, and he appears in the game. And then you can play with him on the game. That caught Lego totally by surprise. But they came out, and we introduced them to a load of companies, and they're now rapidly catching up with, or back overtaken. Skylander, of interest, is already $1 billion realization. I think it's like 4 years old in the gaming sector. So those are some of the companies that we're working with. A view of the future was one of the topics I was asked to mention. And who has heard of Benedict Evans? Okay, Benedict Evans, nobody. Okay. Benedict Evans is a really good guy, works for Andreessen Horowitz. And he's a kind of futurist. He looks at what they do and how they do things. He actually is another Brit. He came over here. But he made a really profound comment the other day, which none of you will have heard, which is good, which is, he said, my grandfather could have told you how many electric motors were in his life. He said, my father could have told you how many microchips were in his life, but he couldn't have told you how many electric motors. There's just electric motors everywhere. He says, I could tell you today how many devices I have at home connected to the internet, but I couldn't tell you how many microchips there are in my house. You know, they're just everywhere. And when you think of it in that generational shift, he says, my children, I have no doubt my children will, you ask them how many devices in the home are connected to the internet, and they'll go, are you crazy? We have no idea. But it just shows that timeline that we're all racing down. My personal thing for anyone who's a corporate, if you're making any sort of device, please, please put in a Wi-Fi connection so you can connect that device to the internet. Okay? If you want to start something, connect it to the internet and then create an API. Who's heard of DropCam? DropCam? So it's a little camera, you plug it in, connect it to your Wi-Fi, and it's a camera. And if something moves, it starts recording, and we see them all around the office. All sorts of people have them, it's kind of weird. But I have them at home, and I actually have it at home in our basement. I live in a block of flats, or a block of apartments, I guess they're called here, and we have shared laundry. There's nothing I hate more than coming back and finding someone else coming and taking my laundry and put it there. So I have a camera pointing at the tumble dryer and the washing machine. And firstly, it tells me as soon as somebody else goes in there, and I can see what they're doing with my laundry, which is not always a good thing. But what it does is sensitive enough that when the drying cycle finishes, the light comes on, it triggers me and sends me a text message. And I'm like, that's brilliant. Now, it's a kind of, we're getting there, but I wish the tumble dryer was just connected to the internet so it would text me when my cycle is finished. But anything that's going into the home, let it connect to the internet. It's a huge, I think there's a huge opportunity there. But be careful when things connect to the internet. I'm sure everyone heard of Target getting hacked a while back. The hackers actually got into Target through the HVAC system, which makes you think. It was through the company that does all the HVAC upgrades was how the hackers managed to get in there. So as we become a more connected society, we're really going to have to think, well, how does that connect to that, to connect to that, to connect to, because security, I think, is going to be one of the big opportunities or problems as we move forward. So I don't like to give advice because all the advice I've been given has proved pretty useless, to be honest. But if I was forced to give advice to a corporate, I would say these sort of things. First, protect your startup brand. Okay, you have a brand to your consumers. You also have a brand to startups, especially if you're here in the Valley. Okay, how you treat startups gets passed around. There are companies who come to us and say, oh, we'd like to meet some startups, and we know they have such a terrible brand that there's going to be very little we can do with them. Okay? By protecting your brand, I mean do not do beauty parades. Okay? Do not ask startups to come in and present what they're doing to you and so forth so you can see it, and then you never answer their emails or you don't follow up. Okay? So be really meticulous that by the time you want to see a startup, you know which part of the business is going to engage with that startup and which part of the business is going to be working with them. We do a huge number of startup intros to corporates, and we're sort of super proud that about 65% of the startups we introduce to a corporate end up with either a trial, a partnership, an investment, or an acquisition. And that's a really important, we see that as a really important number to hold on to. We're not in the business of just doing beauty parades. Startups are really tenacious. You know, if you're a big corporate and a startup's wanting to work with you, to a startup, a big corporate just looks like a row of doors, a mile long, 3 high. And they're tenacious guys, and they will start at one end and open the door, hi, we're a startup, can we partner with you, can we work? No, okay, hi, the next one. And they'll just keep going. Okay, and the problem is a lot of people who work in your companies will go, oh, you're a startup, that's great, I'd love to work for a startup, I work for this big corporate, let me see if I can help you. And it just gets into this long, disastrous sales cycle which never goes anywhere, and it starts to damage your brand. So the thing you should do is take one door, paint it bright red, and put startups come here. Just make it really freaking obvious. If you're a startup and you want to partner with us or you want to work with us, this is the door you come through. And then make sure you have a really good process behind the door so when the startup comes in, you can quickly evaluate whether you want to do business, yes or no. Startups work in like hummingbird speed compared to a corporate. You know, a week is just like, what takes them so long? So try and have a quick process. And it doesn't matter if the answer is no. Just get there quickly. There's nothing worse than having 6 months and then, no, it's not something we're really interested in or it's not something we're looking at. So if you're going to give the no, get there quickly. Startups will love you for it. Okay, and you will get a good brand around having that. Be a platform for innovation. I can't say this enough. I think the best corporates will be the corporates that survive the length of time, be the corporates that manage to position themselves into being a platform for the rest of technology, or an innovation platform. Innovation will come, go along the process, and leave faster and faster. What you want to be is the conveyor belt. You have your customers, you have your reach, you have your operational efficiency. So think of yourself as a platform. And look at people, you know, when you look at people like Salesforce and Apple, you know, increasingly these guys are just becoming the platform for innovation to go out to their customer bases. And that's, I think, a really smart, smart strategy. Work on your startup mojo. Okay, this is actually a really interesting concept which is put together by this guy called Scott Kirshner. If anyone tweets me, I will give them the details of any of the people I've mentioned here. There's a great book called The New Geography of Jobs, which is by Enrico Moretti. Fantastic book about where young people are wanting to work and how they're working and how these technology clusters are forming, and which I would highly recommend. It's actually a professor from UC Berkeley. And the second one is this guy, Scott Kirshner. He's of a website, innovationleader.com. He writes some really good stuff. So another thing, have a startup sonar. Okay, so someone in your team, you need to have a way to identify and track startups that you're either interested in or startups that may not be of interest to you because you think they're going to disappear, but you still want to have a sonar running on those startups. So some sort of process within your business that you have, you have your ears on the ground for what's happening in the startup community. Make sure you are the easiest company in your industry to partner with. That's a winning ticket right there. It is so hard for startups to work with corporates. Make sure you are the easiest company in your sector or in your industry to partner with for startups. It will pay dividends in spades. Your corporate venture team, if you have a corporate venture team, your corporate venture team should be the first place a startup thinks about going for money. Okay? Make sure they're promoting themselves. It's a great access. You can always say no, just say it quickly, but you want to make sure you're promoting your corporate venture team so much that it's the first place that startups want to go. And when you're offering assistance to startups, offer real assistance. Don't say, oh yeah, we'll give you $10,000 support, but that $10,000 is actually kind of $10,000 worth of our service, which you would otherwise buy and tie yourself into. Just offer it in a real way. Everyone is offering stuff to startups, but most of it is not actually real support or real help. And have a culture, and this is, I'll come on to this, but I think this is one of the hardest things, but in a big corporate, have a culture where you are happy to engage and use and sell other people's technology. Get rid of that not built here mentality. It is your survival that's depending on it. And still, far too many companies, there's always one or two people at the red door who are really excited about the startup, but everyone else back in the business, like, oh, we don't want to do this. You have to change that culture in the company. Because startups are starters, and you guys are the scalers. You're the guys who can really add the weight to most of the startups. And the final thing is, don't forget who already works for your company. Every corporate is seeing staff leave to go and start up a startup, or leave to go and join a startup. And if only those and then the corporations are like, oh, we have to go off and engage with startups to get innovation. But you already have that innovation there. You just don't have a platform for your own innovators, your entrepreneurs, to be effective on. So a good starting point is how can we, how could we do a hackathon just for our staff? What sort of ideas are people having? And how can you get that mentality of innovation up and running? And the final thing is have some human APIs. Have some people who are actually appointed to be the API, the human API between startups and your business. Okay, they should be clearly identified internally and externally. Okay, these are where startups are going. And if you think, the companies I mentioned, and there's a number of others who obviously have well built out startup programs. Every corporate needs to have some sort of startup innovation program. It is your survival. And actually, in closing, the biggest challenge for corporates on innovation isn't keeping up with the innovation that's going on around the world, around you. I think the biggest challenge for most corporates is changing the culture and the dynamics within their company to be able to engage with the innovation that's going around you. Okay, thank you very much. We've got time for some questions, if there are any questions. Yeah. Is there a microphone?
How's your business different from a more traditional industrial park where companies, including startups, can rent space?
So the physical space part isn't that different. I think the difference comes from a number of things. First of all, we say no to a lot of companies. We are trying to just pull the best in, and there's not many real estate people that would say no to people. The second thing is serviced office suites which I think are under a lot of threat if you talk about disruption, they're very good at providing real estate. What they don't do is provide any community or any sort of collaboration around that. And I'm not talking about, we have startups working with each other. We don't have a huge amount of that going on. But it's just, if you're passionate about tech, we've had Peter Thiel come and speak. We've had Steve Ballmer come and speak. We have VCs constantly in there. We're all just passionate about technology. And I think it's building that community and then adding in the additional things such as the recruitment, the supply of kind of endless supply of interns and graduates to get going, and pulling together the corporates is a thing that adds the value. What's interesting is when we started, there was a lot of corporate, well, when we started, we used to get one corporate a month. I think we're now getting probably something in the region of about 8 or 9 corporates a month approaching us saying, we're getting into this open innovation thing, or we already have this strategy going. But the corporates used to come to us for the startups. What's interesting, startups are now coming to us because of the corporates. So they're saying, you've got all these amazing relationships with all these corporates. We want to be in RocketSpace so we can engage with those corporates. Does that answer your question? Great. Any other? Tim?
Hi, Duncan. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
As you know, we're in your program with our nifty group. We really enjoy it a lot. And I think one of the things that ecosystems like yours bring, we kind of call it the Silicon Valley in a box. We've got talent, ideas, money, and culture, kind of all in one place happening. Could you comment a little bit more about the kind of the atmosphere from an ecosystem perspective that you think really makes it all happen? And I especially think San Francisco has a kind of a second question. You talked a bit about the change in San Francisco, what makes it unique compared to kind of the shift from Silicon Valley towards San Francisco?
Yeah. So Silicon Valley in a box is a really bad term for us because actually that's
San Francisco in a box now?
That's what, well, yeah, I guess there's that way. But I think that's what Plug and Play call themselves. And I would give Plug and Play a huge amount of credit. They were the sort of pioneers in this thing. They were doing this a long, long time before I'd even thought about it. But we just think we do it in a slightly different way. But yeah, I mean, 30% of the companies in RocketSpace are European. We don't really, are international. It's amazing how many international companies want to have some sort of footprint in Silicon Valley. And the benefit they see with us, with our network, which is now obviously pretty significant, is that it's a quick inroad to get in and get going and to fall into that network of the Valley. I think there's, when we sold, I was part of Message Labs. It was a great exit, $700 million company based out of the UK. We're an international company, but we're based out of London. And when I left there, we sold it to Symantec, and I left there, and I really felt pretty good about, we know how to build big companies and so forth. And I came to Silicon Valley, and it was it's a little bit like going through those stages of incompetence. I came to Silicon Valley and realized that really I'd been unconsciously incompetent until that point. And the horrible thing was I was now consciously incompetent, which is the next stage up, which is a good thing to be. And I'll never forget it because I thought, oh yeah, there's nothing more to learn. We know this. We've done great on this company. And then you get to Silicon Valley and you see what everyone else is doing here, and you're just like, oh my God, this is on a different level. And it's incredible. And when you come into RocketSpace, I have the fortunate time of sitting down with startup after startup. I try and meet one company a day, and just it's more for my education than them, but their benefit. But it's just amazing how some of these people, whether they're out of Y Combinator or other programs or Techstars or whatever, they're in there and they're working on the company. And I just every day I feel back at this. Here I am again, consciously incompetent. And I think that's infectious around the building when there's so many people doing really amazing stuff. And we have people that we call re-entry. It's a space sort of term above anything else. And these are people who have had a company in RocketSpace, left RocketSpace, sold the company, or had a company in RocketSpace, sold the company, and are back doing another company. And we had the first one just at the end of last year, and I think there's now 30 or 40 of them. So it's such a quick cycle to come back. With regards to San Francisco, this is a millennial thing. And I'm not a millennial, clearly, but young people just seem to be intolerant about this idea of, home and work. They've been born into this networked life, into this, a lot of them into the mobile world, certainly into the internet world, and they don't switch off. What we see on our email, I'm a big data freak, and we not big data, like big data freak. But anyway, but what I pulled was all the emails going through our email system, and it's exactly the same sort of line. It's really busy, really busy, really busy, and then 5 o'clock it goes down, 6 and 7, and then 8 o'clock it starts coming back up again, and 9 o'clock and 10, and they just never switch off. It's terrible. I mean, they're just constantly on. So we've done away with holidays. You don't have to take vacation now, because even when they're on vacation, they don't. 2 hours, yeah, there's a response to your email. You're on holiday, just stop. But and they have this sort of impatience that they want to live and work in close proximity. And what's interesting about what the internet is doing is it's kind of destroying jobs, typically destroying low-paid jobs across America and creating high-paid jobs within the cluster. Okay, if you think of Netflix and Blockbuster, or Amazon and Borders, all those jobs destroyed across America, all the jobs being created in the cluster, and the clusters are getting more and more and more under pressure. So we're going to see, the real estate price, that's not going to be a problem that's going to go away soon. We actually position RocketSpace on communication loops, because we think everyone's going to have to start coming in from East Bay or North Bay or whatever by BART, because it's just becoming so expensive. But the millennials, they just do not have this idea of commuting 40 minutes to get to work. They want to live and work right there. Any other? Yep. Gentleman over there.
The opposite of Kevin's question. I spoke to a senior officer in one of the big Bay Area design consultancies, and he told me he lives in Austin because it's worth $20,000 of his company's money for him to stay outside of the Silicon Valley echo chamber. And so much of what I think you must see is unrelated to the rest of the world. And I wonder if you see a downside to this extraordinary concentration that we've built here.
I do. I got asked this question I was in London a few weeks ago, and this entrepreneur, he's an older guy, came to me and said, I don't think I'd ever want to put my company in RocketSpace. Because if you've got all these other great companies that just poach all my people away, and that'd be the thing. And I said that's a bit like having, I used a soccer analogy. That's a bit like using owning Manchester United, but saying I don't want them to play in the Premier League, because the players will get around, pulled away to other teams. And I think the same's true to an extent. I mean, what's interesting is how quickly. I mean, Austin's a great example. There's a cluster forming there. Clusters forming in. Even Vegas with what Tony's doing there, and New York, and I think they will catch up. But there's no doubt, there is still a unique brilliance about the people and the mindset of the people that are working in San Francisco that people are willing to pay an enormous premium for. People coming out of Rocket U, typically they're taking a job at $70,000, $80,000 a year for that first place job, and they're doubling that salary within 12 months. Because once you've got a year's coding experience, then you're just so much more valuable. So it's absolutely phenomenal. And yeah, I think ultimately it will obviously dissipate out. But when you look at the cost, when you look at these companies, this is another sort of theory, which is actually kind of interesting when I'll finish on it, is so all these things with big platforms, like sports teams and anything where there's a big platform that exists. If you're a supermodel or a great sports player or a great musician or whatever, the platform, the size of the platform allows you to get paid a huge amount of money. Yeah? If you just sang in a bar, you know, if you were a band called, I don't know, U2, and you just sang in a bar, they're not going to pay you the sort of money until you get on one of these great platforms. And I think the same's happening with the internet, that we see, and the funny thing about people who perform on platforms is they have agents. You know, soccer people have agents, or sports people have agents, models have agents, rock stars have agents. And so I was getting to this point of how long is it before techies have agents? Because they're on the most enormous platform, and they're clearly hugely valuable because the influence they can have by making a right decision on Facebook would be, you know, it could make Facebook hundreds of millions of dollars. So I thought this is really interesting. Why aren't there agents working for techies? And the answer is there is. It does now exist. There's a company that is an agency for this thing. So the bigger the platform, the cream of the crop, the very top people are just so valuable. You know, it's why companies have been bought for billions of dollars just to get those top people onto their platform, whether you're Google or Facebook or whoever. It's an interesting concept. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.